Hi there. In this video, we will continue the Su-25 Frogfoot story with its armament and then Su-25T and Su-39 Super Rook variants and their operational history. About the operational history of the Su-25 in general, there are at least 10 to 15 videos to be made, each deserving its own story. It is long, 40 years and more. Instead, I'll be very brief about it, summarizing only the conflicts that the Super Rook took part of. Since you already know the basics about the Su-25 from my previous two videos, I will turn my attention towards the armament here for starters. Armament of the combat aircraft was always least interesting for me. I preferred to focus my attention on the flying machine concept of each individual aircraft, exploring its aerodynamics, controls, performance, engines, and cockpit, especially cockpit. Armament is part of the practical usage, and even though I am not a pacifist by any means, it never touched me very deeply. Anyhow, armament is what those fighter planes are built to carry and use, thus it is the necessary evil in the whole story. Su-25, unlike the A-10, is not built around its gun. However, Su-25 has a Geshe 30, a 30mm aviation gun carrying 250 rounds in total. It is not powerful as the Gatling of the Warthog, but it is a reliable weapon. It was designed to be used in Su-25, Su-39, and Mi-24 Hind helicopter. It is tailored mostly around destroying the life force of the enemy, or, saying it otherwise, kill people. This is what it does best. With that said, it can take care of light armored vehicles, flying targets including armored such, taking care of all these mentioned above from close to mid-range distances. Geshe 30 features twin-barrel gun and can be found in the nose section of the Su-25 beneath the cockpit and behind the tip of the Frogfoot's nose. The Geshe 30-2, meaning 2 barrels and 30 meaning its caliber in millimeters, is capable of 3,000 rounds per minute. Each round is fired with initial speed of 870 meters per second, which is a very decent performance. In case this is not enough, Su-25 can carry underwing containers with 23mm Geshe 23 with 260 rounds each, 4 in total, 2 under each wing, adjustable too. However, 30mm rounds of the nose gun provide decent recoil, and for the slightly underpowered Su-25, that appeared to be a problem. With a weight of 290 grams per projectile, that was a serious kickback for the subsonic jet. This was addressed in Su-39, repositioning the gun for balance, about which we will talk later in this video. The Geshe 30 is electrically driven, but even though promoted as a very successful weapon, it wasn't a favorite among the pilots and maintenance personnel. Its balance was the main reason about the dislike, and that caused some additional issues, but as I've said, that was addressed later in Su-39. With that said, Soviets had the same problem with MiG-23BN and MiG-27, especially with MiG-27, where they overdid it, installing a gun that damaged mostly the MiG instead of the enemy, resulting in multiple crashes caused by the overpowered weapon. That is a story for another time, and I promise I will make that. Comparing Geshe 30 with the A-10, the American plane features same caliber gun with 4,200 per minute rate of fire and 1,174 rounds, which is pretty much 5 Su-25 jets in a row. Besides, the projectile weight with the A-10 is astonishing 395 grams. So, It wasn't the time, but the lack of ingenuity and probably the mental capacity what made the difference. But enough for the gun. Under its long straight wings, Su-25 has 5 pilots each. Innermost ones are usually taken by additional fuel tanks, but when they are not, they can pretty much carry everything. Outermost ones are reserved for air-to-air missiles presented by R-60 or R-60M, also known as AA-8 Aphid. Some sources say K-13 and R-73 are options too. Those are there to allegedly give the Su-25 air-to-air capabilities, which is quite ridiculous because the only thing that it can fight with those are eventually helicopters or maybe Cessnas aiming to land at the Red Square. You've probably seen a recent video where Su-27 tries to shoot down an Mi-70 helicopter over Ukraine with its gun. Quite unsuccessful. Which is self-explanatory considering the speed difference and the agility of any helicopter and the inertia of the Su-27 with its higher speeds. Yet, Sukhoi pretended that the Su-25 can shoot down enemy aircraft, for which there is no actual proof, with 40-plus years of service. On the rest of the pilots, Su-25 can carry a variety of weapons. Let's start with the unguided rockets, which are most widely used, and that goes from Su-25 through MiG-29 and Su-34. Actually, it's ridiculous air superiority fighters like MiG-29 to use unguided rockets, but, Russians. Su-25 can carry blocks of S5, S8, or S13. Other option is single pilot, single rocket application with the air-to-ground options of S-24 or S-25. Those are the ones you see on most of the advertisement photos or paintings of the Frogfoot. They are the big, thin, weird-looking ones. High-precision air-to-ground weaponry includes S-25L, X-25ML, and X-29L. For those, the laser rangefinder located in the nose is used and is to be maintained pointing the target up until weapons impact. Here is a good time to mention that the old Su-25 have Clan laser rangefinder, where the upgraded ones, the ones you see bombing Ukraine, are using improved Salt-25 system. There is quite a difference. Finally, with the Su-25, unguided bombs can be FOP-250, FOP-500, SOP-500, Concrete AB-500, RBK-250 and 500, and ODAP-500 vacuum bombs. The latter one deserves your attention. Type ODAB-500 in YouTube and enjoy the show. There is an option for 4 bombs per pylon if they are FOP-100, but they are light and they are mostly used for light targets and for training purposes. It is not overly impressive array of weapons, but is not too shabby for an 80s subsonic bomb truck. Now, it's time to stray a bit from the standard Su-25. Su-25T and Su-39 is what we're going to discuss next. Those are basically 2 variations of the same plane, latter one sometimes referred to not as 39 but as 25TM. In general, this ugly duckling deserves a video of its own, but since not a big fan of slow airplanes, I will squeeze it in the current one. That is not the only reason. The other one is that in total, there were around 20 built of those too, with no clear number due to the Russian propaganda on the matter. They might have been only 5, with different board numbers applied over time. Nobody knows, and the board number trick has been done on multiple occasions in the Soviet sphere of influence, and actually not only by the Russians. Su-25T is basically the twin-seater Su-25UB converted into something different, removing the second pilot and opening that space for alterations. The rest of the construction is generally kept original. The nose is slightly elongated to accommodate I-251 Sukhoi TV sensor, and the vertical stabilizer was allegedly enlarged. However, it is also larger by design on the UB twin-seater options, so that might be misinformation. The nose gear is positioned to the left side to clear the path of the moved cannon, which found its final position beneath the fuselage in between and slightly in front the intakes. Reduction in thermal signature has been achieved through cooling intakes on the upper surface of the aircraft, and some additional tricks were made which masks hot turbine section of the jet engines, like for example curvatures of the exhaust supposedly hiding the hottest part from a direct sight. There are other improvements, like for example an autopilot that can take the airplanes on its course to the target and back to home base and complete the whole approach to basically Cat 1 limitations. There are additional dampening systems, stabilization improvements, and many similar control adjustments and upgrades compared to the original Frogfoot. On Soviet military planes, autopilots are known to be aggressive, so allegedly the improved system addressed that issue, but this is my personal guess only. I am suspecting that because of the fact that Sukhoi planes were always more innovative compared to MiG planes, and eventually in the late 80s, Su-25T was good enough to at least do everything smoothly and effortlessly compared to the rest. The cockpit is now finally pressurized, which is a giant leap if you ask me, allowing the higher altitude flying, thus extending the range of the plane and compensating for the original design of the Su-25, which to this day remains unpressurized airplane. The roots of Su-25T and TM design can be traced to the lessons learned in Afghanistan and the need to introduce tough, reliable anti-tank aircraft for the eventual war over European territories. The very first option appeared in 1984, and by 1988 it was decided that it will be a serial production plane. However, with the fall of the Soviet Union, those plans faded away quickly. The most important improvement of the Su-25T and TM over the standard Su-25 was the capability to use high-precision TV-guided weapons and, in the same time, to have ECM protection. Infrared jamming was embedded in the initial design due to the extremely tough environment that Su-39 was planned to work in. Afghanistan was a fight against people who didn't know much about warfare, modern one at least. But in European theater, the Super Rook would have been in a whole new and different situation. NATO was preparing for that since its beginnings. The ECM was designed to work in an auto mode, which alleviated the pilot from the need to constantly work his way out of various situations, and even though this practice does not show the full ECM and IR protection effectiveness, it is still a giant leap over what Su-25 had. The countermeasures were to be carried in a pod under the belly and or under the outermost wing pilots. Vichur was the other system installed. It is the anti-tank system that the plane was planned originally or at least partially around. Since we have seen those on the latest Russian helicopters, which are much more effective against tanks, that is no longer a priority nor a reality considering the current events. It was in the 80s though. Despite the minimalistic numbers of the built examples, the planes were used in real combat conditions in 1999 in Chechnya, as well as there is various information sources that say Georgia too. It is an obscure subject with probably only few people knowing the facts for certain. Quite surprising, one or sources say two of those limited Su-25Ts were used by Eritrea allegedly flown by Russians under Eritrean Air Force flag. Were those pilots mercenaries or not, we'll probably never know. So Su-25T is battle-tested, even though not largely produced and in not so challenging environment of Africa. In the end, however, Russians leaned toward the cheaper upgrade of the Su-25, the SM-3 standard, and the Super Rook remained in the shadows. As a conclusion, it seems that there is still hope for the Su-39 to appear again. The reasons is that in Ukraine, Russia lost some serious number of Su-25 SM-3s, and they lost some others in Syria. In the same time, they are no longer in production. The only factory that can produce Su-25 is Ulan-Ude, which does not make them currently, and they are focused on UB versions anyhow. So, if Russians decide to reopen Su-25 production lines again, whatever they will make, it will be based on the twin-seater, hence the Su-25TM is the most probable option, with of course improvements at least to the digitalized level of the Su-25 SM-3 currently in use. The initial idea that they promoted that Ka-52 helicopters will substitute this flying brick have already met the harsh reality of the war. And it seems that there is nothing more reliable than the Su-25s in battle in the Russian inventory so far, at least. So let's give them a year or two more and we'll see. We might get to see Su-25TM, aka Su-39 again. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.